Welcome to the Selling in the Motor Trade podcast, in association with Simco Training. This is the weekly podcast where we share best practice, tips and ideas on how to sell more cars, improve your service department, and generally put more profit into your dealership or dealer group. I'm your host, Simon Bogert. Now, some of you probably already know me as Skippy. I want to start by saying thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Selling in the Motor Trade. Firstly, I want to say thank you very much for all the listeners out there, because this podcast is just going from strength to strength. And today it's my great pleasure to be sitting with Jason Cranswick. Now, Jason is the Chief Operating Officer of Marubeni Auto Investments, UK, but also the Managing Director of the Norton Group. Now, I've been really looking forward to getting Jason on the podcast because he's quite unique. He's got both sides of the motor industry. He's actually worked with the dealers and dealer world, but also he's worked with the manufacturer. So, Jason, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Morning, Skippy. Thank you for the very kind invite. I've been looking forward to this, actually. I always enjoy speaking with you, and thank you for the opportunity today.
Well, Jason, we've got to go back to your background, okay? From John Lewis, trainee, I believe, management trainee, now the CEO of Marubeni Automotive Investments. You've got both sides of it, and it's quite a ride there, okay? In the middle, I believe you work with Volkswagen Group and Seat and Cupra and Cinch. We've got to talk about Cinch in a second there. But can I ask you, John Lewis, what did you learn starting with John Lewis that's as relevant today, do you think, in the motor trade as it was when you started? Can you tell us about your time starting with John Lewis?
Yeah, I mean, it seems a very long time ago now. It was kind of 1980, 86, 87 when I joined there as a school leaver. I think what John Lewis had then, I think they've still got it now, is a real focus on retailing and premium retailing.
Yeah,
maybe talk about definition of premium later, but I think, their ethos in terms of, how they got people invested, colleagues invested as partners. Although there was no financial investment, it was definitely an emotional and an ethos investment that they had. And also, their approach to, as they called it then, never knowingly undersold. So the commitment that there would be fairness in pricing and transparency in pricing. And it's ironic, it's 30 plus years ago that was what I was doing. And, a lot of those values for me have followed all the way through my career in different iterations. So I think it was, and in many ways still is, an amazing business. But again, a business that's also going through radical change. And
I believe they've dropped the slogan "Never under." Is that right? They've dropped that now.
Yeah, they dropped it because of the internet, because they could no longer with integrity say that they were never going to be knowingly undersold, because the internet changed things. But what they've had to do is go off and react and adapt their business model and diversify. And but at the core of it, still, if you want a great retail experience, more often than not, go to John Lewis.
Yeah, it's true. Absolutely true. And that whole partnership, you're right, there's no financial incentive for the employee, but working for them, do you definitely feel like you are a partner in the business?
You do. And, I've still got friends that work in that environment, and I'm sure they still feel the same, that, it is a very collegiate environment. They have the dealer count, or the partner council, as they call it. So there's definitely a cooperative approach. Everybody has to buy into the way, the ethos. They're very, very principled when it comes to their values. A lot of things that we do or should do, like our 10 at 10s, that's what happens in the store. Every morning the managers get the teams together and they talk about yesterday's results. They talk about what the mission is for the next day. And actually the leadership, then, and I think still does now, walks the floor, and, I remember I'm going to say COO, whether that was really his title at the time. He was revered when he came into the store because he'd get his tape measure out. And the first thing he did, he measured the fixtures to make sure the fixtures were in line, which is, I guess, what we do as leaders in our businesses when we go walk through our dealerships and start looking at, do we look like retailers?
I love the story. Retail's in the detail. I was talking a story about Mr. Smythe, who started RRG Group and now Swansway Group, and he was renowned for coats on the back of the chairs and retails and the detail. And there's a story about the managing director of Tesco's many years ago. Someone interviewed him on a Business Sunday program, said they made more money than any retailer had ever made. And they said, "What's the secret to your success?" And he said, "It's frustratingly simple. What I do is I spend my life visiting as many stores as I possibly can every week. And when I go in, I like to make sure the hand baskets displayed on the left-hand side and the right, because they get they on the left-hand side, they get run out quickly and no one has a hand basket. Then I go to the bananas. I make sure the bananas are displayed just as they're turning yellow. Because if they're too green, they don't look inviting. If they're too yellow, people don't get their life out of them." Now, the interviewer said, "Hold on. You're the managing director of Tesco's.
Yeah.
Okay. You earn however much it was and bonuses equaling so many millions. And you tell me that you make sure bananas are the right color?" And his answer's beautiful. He said, "Yes, because if my staff see me making a fuss about the little things, it rubs off onto every single thing we do."
And it is so true. And I think what we aspire to do, and it's not always easy, is to do the management by walking about. And going and walking the floor. When I was heading up network development for Audi, we did a network-wide customer service activity, and we used Ritz-Carlton, and we shipped them in from the US, their consulting firm. And they talk about their credo, which is a bullet point card that every colleague carries, and every day they look at the credo, and it's kind of their way. The managers have what they call lion time, which is where the managers of the hotels have to stand in the foyer and watch what's going on. For me, a big area is, it sounds bizarre, it's the toilets. Quite frankly,
it's not bizarre.
If your toilets are in poor condition, it's a good indicator as to the depth of understanding that the managers and leaders and staff have of that business. And these are the things that we've got to tune into. And Skip, I'm sure we'll talk about it later on in terms of how you prioritize stuff. But that whole management by walking about is where any manager or leader gets the most value. And it's hard as jobs get bigger and physically. And that was perhaps one of the things post COVID, is making sure that people are leading from the front. And
okay. So, Jason, a young Jason growing up in school, what do you want to do with your life? What was the dream? I always like to see what the dream was and then where you've ended up there. What was the dream while you're at school?
Jumping buses.
Okay.
As
Evil Knievel.
Evil Knievel. Knievel. It was. No, seriously. Eddie Kidd, I guess, more than Evil Knievel.
Okay.
Yeah. As a youngster, I used to enjoy. I had a real passion for motorbikes, which is funny how things have come full circle.
Okay.
My big thing, I really wanted to go and jump buses on motorbikes, but that's a really stupid thing to do. So,
but that makes it. I see one of your posts last week. Was it? You're in one of your toy shops, you called it.
Oh,
and I'm trying to work out which one to go ahead with. So that makes sense now.
Yeah. So that's what I wanted to do. But with Candleskip, I did okay at school. I was like a lot of my peer group. I didn't do sixth form. I left school at 16. I didn't have a particularly clear view of what I wanted to do, what my purpose was. But that's where going to John Lewis was great, because I did college one day a week on a day release. It was a BTEC. You'll remember, the days of YTS schemes and BTECs and so on.
I was in Australia, but I've heard about them over here.
Yeah. But what it gave me, I guess, was a kind of a career journey, a career plan. And it was great because I went in at 16, I left at 19. I was already, I guess, at department manager level at 19. But one of the things I did see, which was typical of retail, is I hit a glass ceiling. Where actually, bearing in mind this was in the late 80s, it was kind of like, well, we know you can do the job. You've evidenced you've got the competence. However, we don't promote until people are of an age. So it's kind of stand still for a few years. And that as a concept for me didn't sit well, because I wanted to get on. And that's what led me to join the motor trade in the late 80s. I kind of started automotive as a motivated but somewhat frustrated 19-year-old.
So that was Vindus Group then, was it?
It
You
was,
started
yeah.
it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I did. And, fabulous. We talk about businesses with strong principles, and, bearing in mind that at that time, Frank Vindus was still very much in the chair, and, the disciplines that Frank, and following through from Frank, that Nigel and Gary, instilled in, they sit with you still now, the kind of the 3-ring maximum on the telephone. If God help you if you didn't answer the phone after, or if you answered the phone after 3 rings, God help you if it was if it was one of the bosses, because it had to be done quicker. But also,
still relevant today. Still so relevant, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Ringing at the basics.
Our phone ringing today is probably our live chat or our email.
Yep.
But we've got to be on point. And a lot, and they know because I talked to them about it, a lot to thank really the Vindus family to bring me into the industry at that time, and back me, because I went in as a trainee and ended up as sales manager of their business in Bedford at 21 years old. So it was they put a lot of trust in me.
So in those early days, do you look back at any mentors, any influences, people that you look up to? You think, hold on, I'm in this situation. What would John do? What would Dave do? Does anyone stand out in your mind?
Yeah, there's 2 people, and I often refer to them. So in my very young years, I guess, I had a boss. In my early 20s, I went to be GSM of a business for Godfrey Davis. Godfrey Davis had recently been acquired by Caverdale, which was a fast-growing PLC of its time. It eventually reversed up through Quicks into, I guess, ultimately Lookers. But I had a boss, a chap called Kevin Slade, and he was dealer principal for 3 sites, and I worked in one that he wasn't attending. He was at Jaguar and Mazda, and I ran the Honda business for him. And he was great because, again, he came from the hotel industry.
Okay.
So his background was, sort of serving at high levels in hotels, and then he came into automotive. And again, he and I did things like bringing people out of retail. In the early 90s, we were bringing people out of John Lewis environments to deliver great customer service in automotive. We moved, away from kind of the standard model there. But Kevin was great because he'd always push it back. Well, what would you do? But he would be there, to provide his opinion, but he wasn't there to just spoon feed it in. And he was a real mentor at the time. And then in later career,
sorry, I could cut you off there. It's again, that's the 1-minute manager, isn't it? Kenneth Blanchard. Don't come to me with the problem. Come to me with a couple of solutions. It's the same thing. What would you do? What would you do?
And the thing is, and 1-minute manager, I'd recommend that to anybody. It was on my early reading list for sure.
Yeah, great book.
But it's about it's about the monkey. Yeah. And, I think a lot of people like to just throw the monkey. Yeah.
Yep. Monkey on your back.
Yeah. And they just throw it, and I've seen that through my career. And, my mission is to help people recognize, number one, that they own the monkey. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, is it well, again, on the reading list, the chimp paradox, I think, is a great one. Understanding, kind of, you can't control the monkey, you can influence certainly, how you react to it, but also getting people to become responsible and accountable. And again, that's something that's followed through. It's not easy. And there's a lot of environments that are built of right, you don't own the monkey. In fact, you own nothing. You just come to me for everything.
Yeah.
I think that's the environment I've always tried to break away from is no.
Well, Jason, I was doing some work with your managers and talk about process, and we'll get to on that later. But one of the things that really hit home with your managers is that monkey on the back story. And it's absolutely brilliant because, again, these monkeys, they breed, don't they? Because what happens is that that salesperson, that service advisor comes to you and says, I've got this problem, I've got that problem. And they've just given it to your manager. And by the end of the bloody day, the poor managers running a zoo. They got monkeys everywhere. And it's just... but people brand new listening to this podcast, brand new into management, there's some books that you just got to go and listen to. If you listen to them on the way to work, or go and read them. It's brilliant books. Absolutely brilliant.
I agree with you. And again, in the spirit of sort of sharing, 1 minute manager is great because it gets people to think, and quite often, they're small, but they're quick reads, and let's be fair, in the industry, we tend not to be, voracious readers, but actually if you can find time to it, you should. And the other one for me is the chimp paradox, which again has, a tenuous link to the zoo, but actually the fact that we're wired in a way, and there's certain bits we can and can't influence. But if you are aware of the fact that you've got this chimp that might, do something depending on a set of circumstances, then try and reframe the circumstances. But just on your point though, Skip, and hopefully it's relevant, is when you go into a new business, and I've been into a few, you immediately go in and you've got to go and start solving problems. You've got to go in and create a template. You've got to maybe put in new operating processes and so on. So it's very easy to step over that line of being the solution provider, because probably initially that's what you were put in to do. The art to it, and one that I'll work tirelessly to achieve, is that ability to transition from being the solution provider, which is probably what happens on day one to day 101, to then helping people come up with their solutions on their versions. And I think the realization,
getting people to think for themselves almost.
And somebody else's 100%, is probably somebody else's 70 or 80%. But if they can do it and they own it, then it's freed up time for that other person to go off and do stuff only they can do. And that's my mantra, I guess, when I'm going into businesses to do what I do.
Yeah, get people to actually. Too often we see maybe some line managers in businesses that they're still doing the job for their employees all the time. Senior managers, they're like, hold on, let them do the job, give them the whole responsibility for it, because they can't do anything because they're scared to do anything because you're not letting them.
And Skip, I think again, there's a lot of people that have only ever been in the motor trade channel.
Yes.
And of that, as you've mentioned before, many people are only in the one channel. So they're either only ever been in OEM, or only ever been in dealer. There's also a real habit in our industry for only vertical promotions. So what you end up getting is you get people that have a mile deep but inch wide reference point. And actually what we're often needing is a mile wide and more than an inch deep reference point, but you need to have those dimensions. So, from a personal point of view, I don't blame people for not knowing what they don't know. And it's as a result of a lot of our industry's norms. But I think what we've got to do is try and get, different reference points, different perspectives, and also help people think outside the box. And that's really the role of the leader. We did a session 10 days ago with a Marine commando. It's the second session with them. And this guy, is a behavioral expert now, an author. But he was talking about his experiences of going through, commando selection, and, how different people have different perspectives of combat situation. But, what you've got to be able to do is understand how you can rely on a team, the role of discipline, resilience, but also the speed to acceptance that has to come when you're in those kind of scenarios. And the reason we did it is not that we want our teams to become Marine commandos, but we just wanted them to have some awareness and understanding of what goes on in other areas that could be translated back into their place. And the big one that came out of that, and I didn't expect it, is the one of empathy. He says sometimes
I wouldn't have expected that.
And he says, be prepared to throw your mate a magazine when they're out, but know that they're about out and know to throw it. Rather than leave them hanging, empty. And you be selfish by shoveling away your magazines only for your own use. And I think one of my missions in all of this is for us to create a very kind environment. If we're kind to each other, the likelihood is then that we'll have strength and depth, we'll have sustainability and resilience, and actually we'll end up with a great business. But it starts with being kind.
So I'm really interested. Your time as a dealer principal development coach, You've seen lots of great companies and probably some companies that needed coaching. Okay. There's a book. This is going to sound like a book review on this one, but there's a great book that we both read.
It's like book club.
It is a bit like that. But The Good to Great. Okay. Jim Collins. Great book. Okay. But I want to ask you, what are some of the ingredients of a really good business? When you're a dealer principal development coach with Volkswagen Group, when you walked in there, what were some of the elements there that you thought, this company is not just good, it's great?
Yeah. Let me take you back one step as to how I ended up in that job. It was a happy accident. I got to my early 30s. I was MD of a Land Rover business. I was running it on behalf of a family. But ultimately, it was a family business. It was never going to be mine. I had a very small shareholding, in somebody else's business. I didn't have £1 million in cash or a freehold property, so ownership wasn't going to be the next step. So I thought, well, what can I do with the skills I've built up? And Volkswagen Group were looking for someone to go in to coach heads of businesses. So I thought, well, I think I could do that, although I had no, academic qualification for it. But I guess the realization I had, and I saw that time, a couple of years, almost as a sabbatical, really, that actually it gave me chance to realize it isn't about what I can do. How can I get other people to do what I can do? And, it gave me a chance to really think about, how do you motivate, how do you unlock the potential in others, which has been a continuum through my career. I guess what I saw in that Good to Great is the willingness to learn, the capacity and the willingness to learn, I think, is the overriding factor. And also the willingness to reflect. And it's funny, you talk about, the Good to Great, those businesses in that book, and many people have read it, were very cognizant. Yeah. They were prepared to analyze, they were prepared to adapt. They reacted to the landscape in front of them that they could see, and they were always changing. The ones that didn't work so well were the ones that were ignorant to the changes, didn't read the signals, perhaps were overwhelmed with hubris and ego, and as a result didn't see the signs until they were too late. So you've kind of opened the door on this one. Yeah, Good to Great, I'd say, is definitely a good read. Yeah. There's a better one. There's a better one in the series, which is called How the Mighty Fall.
Now, I hadn't heard of this book until yesterday, so I haven't read it yet. You have to tell us about this.
You've not read it in the last 24 hours?
No, I've not. Sorry, I've not done that. As you said, in the motor trade, maybe I take a bit longer to read things. Okay. Jim Collins again.
Yeah, Jim Collins. It's funny. I read that book in, 2010, something like that. And I remember when I went to, so I was asked to take on the role of head of network development and customer quality for Audi. I've been working in Volkswagen Group for a number of years. I've done some special projects for the MD's office, and an opportunity came up to take on this role. And I remember going to a presentation where all the MDs of the different brands in Volkswagen Group presented, and Martin Sander, who again was a real mentor to me, he was the new MD of Audi in UK, and he was on stage talking about Good to Great and all of those attributes I said before. And I remember I went up and doorstepped him at the end of the presentation and said, I've got another book for you, I'll send it to you. And it was called Mighty Fall. And I said, the reason it's better is it is all about those that didn't make the journey and what can we learn from them. And it was quite a pivotal point, I guess, in my career with him and also with Volkswagen Group, because it is a great book, but I say it centers around people's ego getting in the way. And I think that's the big thing as an industry. We've got to make sure it doesn't happen.
Did you see that when you went into dealerships where the dealer principal wasn't great, the business wasn't great? Was it ego getting in the way? Was it any lessons from that you've seen from How the Mighty Fall that were happening in these dealerships?
Yeah, I mean, ego is a small word. It covers a lot of different sort of motives or influences. I actually think it's openness probably as much as ego. And as an industry, we tend to get measured on,
So how do you mean openness, Jason, from ego?
I think for me is, are people receptive to there might be a different way? Are
Okay.
people receptive to the fact that people might have something to add? And also, are people receptive to the fact that letting someone in might help rather than hurt? And I think as an industry, there's I can think of many examples where very autocratic leaders who, very finger pointing, very judgmental, and people feel as though they're going to be vulnerable if actually they let them in. But for me, that kind of vulnerability is powerful. To be honest, Skip, I have to make loads of decisions every day, as we all do. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of them aren't right. But my driver has to be, as long as I make more right than wrong, then we'll be okay. But also,
and make the decision. Actually,
make the decision. Yeah. That's the big thing. But I have seen it where people just aren't. It starts with not being open, and as a result, then nothing can help, nothing can change. Whereas if people just open up and go, okay, I trust. I've got no reason not to trust. Actually, I can see that you've maybe got experiences I don't have. Then it's organic and quite rapid, the changes that come about within a business. So that's just some examples of my perspective.
Can we go on and talk about your time at Cinch, the disruptors? And the reason why I say that, if we look at Kazoo's share price, looked at last week, I think they're down to 44 million. They floated, I think it was 6.5 billion, which is a bit of a slide. In America, we have people listen to this in America. Carvana, I believe their share price is down 95% or something like that in their death spiral. Is there a place for these disruptors? Because you're unique again, because you work with Cinch. Now, I understand Cinch is slightly different, but I want to get your views on these disruptors. Is there a place for them? Is their days done? And also, it's Cinch. Peter Smythe might say, well, they just want them to be a bloody bank, us to be a bank for them. So I want to get your views on your time at Cinch and disruptors, please.
Yeah, okay. I think it's well recorded, my time at Cinch, and I think it's still easy to sort of get my viewpoint from there. Interviews and that were done, and most of it remains the same. I've got real thanks and gratitude to Avril in particular, and BCA more broadly in Constellation, to allow me the chance to experience it. I for a number of years wanted to get deep into digital transformation. Been doing that within the Jardine organisation before. So when the opportunity came to join Cinch, it was a bit of a no-brainer. Post-COVID and everything was heading in that direction. And as you say, people like Carvana and Kazoo were setting a template that could be followed. A couple of differences, I think, with Cinch, and they still prevail, is number one, Cinch was created as a marketplace. Now, marketplaces behave in a certain way. People participate in marketplaces for different reasons. So you've got dealers participating in them, OEMs participating in them, leasing and rental businesses participating in them, because what everybody was looking for at that point was kind of the proof point as to whether online vehicle sales was worth it, whether consumers would buy vehicles virtually and with an end-to-end digital process and self-serving. The whole concept of omni-channel, I don't need to talk to you about kind of its place in our industry going forward. It's there, so let's not fight against it. And it worked then, and it'll work now, and it'll work in the future. The question is, what proportion of consumers or businesses will buy a vehicle without touching and feeling it? Now, the good thing, I guess, for me as a bricks and mortar dealer now is a lot of customers will use it for research. They'll use it to self-serve to a higher level than we saw pre-COVID. But the good news is a lot of customers still want to come into the dealer to conclude, to transact, and the proportion of online-only sales is still modest, if not small.
Yes. Yeah.
However, the proportion of omni-channel retailing and through the research stage or whatever is super high. Now, the only comment I guess I'll make, coming back to your point around viability, is we've got to remember is Constellation already had prep centers, trucking, logistics, access to inventory. So they had all those things that the others had to go off and outsource or procure or work out. So, admiration for what Avril and Constellation have done with Cinch is they've unlocked the vertical integration that already existed. Throw that into our world, that's what we're doing. We're vertically integrating businesses.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think many operators are looking for how they can, you know, join up the stack, take more slices of the salami as it comes through, and actually create a vertically integrated structure. And there's some great examples of those within our industry that have done that, you know, already to really good effect, where they've maybe got a, you know, dealer business, they might have a rental business, they might have a used car outlet, you know, they might have a finance brokerage, you know, they've probably got their own, you know, even some of them, the best examples, have got their own auction houses, their own trucking, you know, so they've created their own versions of it. And I think that's the difference. That's the game changer. You've got to have a vertically integrated business, because the online vehicle sales piece on its own may not be enough to make the commercials work.
See, Cinch makes sense for me because they did have the auction houses, the We Buy Cars, they had the prep centers, they had so much there. Cazoo is exactly what you said. They're starting from scratch there. I don't know, Cazoo, are they going to make it? I'm not smart enough to know that, but they would appear to be in a world of pain still.
Yeah, Skip, I don't know, and it'd be wrong of me to comment because I don't know. But what I do know is that we've all upped our game as a result.
Yeah, so true.
I was in one of our used car prep centers that's in build at the minute. You know, I was there yesterday looking at the fantastic photo studio that's being installed. You know, the workshop bays that are dedicated to used car prep. We were talking about which lines the cars that have just been purchased will go into, which ones that are in whip, waiting cosmetic and imaged. And you know, for me, it's about creating that industrialized sausage machine that creates high quality used cars that we then sell through dealer websites or dealer forecourts. You know, we've all done that. And I think we have to thank the online disruptors for upping our game for us, because without it, we may not have felt we had a burning platform without it. But with it, with that pressure from the online only retailers, I don't think there's a dealer in the land who hasn't gone huge step forwards to digital transformation.
Yeah, so true. So disruptors, they have changed it. Well, there's nothing that I suppose Cazoo can do that we can't do as a dealer at all. Sorry?
Choice and vision.
Choice, yeah. And listen, I've got to say, first-hand experience of your prep center. Last time I was there, Gus, thank you very much. Helped me out on this one. I curbed my wheel on the way in. I thought, what have I done? He said, no worries, we'll get that sorted for you. And so quick and done. And by the time I'd gone home, wheel done. Gus, your prep center is absolutely brilliant. So, first-hand experience on this. So thank you, Gus, for that one there. I really appreciate it. That just leaves me to say that all details of this episode and other episodes on the selling in the motor trade can be found on our website, simcotraining.co.uk. Go there to get a copy of our book, Words That Sell Cars. Go there to sign up to a free trial of our Sales Fitness online sales training program. Easiest way to get hold of me is Simon Bokert through LinkedIn. Thank you.